and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. This is Julia. I am thrilled to introduce Jordana Kier, the founder of LOLA, which is a feminine and reproductive health products company. In this episode, we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about those moments when you first embrace the concept of becoming a parent or becoming whatever the next phase of your identity is, particularly as it relates to your family building journey. And in this case, we're going to talk about a dog as an entry point to parenting and how amazing is it that these creatures can be the gateway for a whole new life for us. But I also think it's important that sometimes we talk exclusively about the generative process of creating a family. What was the fertility journey like, or how did you define what family meant for you through the trials and tribulations or ups and downs of whatever the creation process was? And that's really important. But also as important is how do you step in and out of the workforce? It's sort of the what comes after. Yeah, we talk about creating a family, but then you've created it. What do you do? How do you integrate back into your old life? How does your identity change? And we're going to talk a lot about maternity leave, exiting and on-ramping from maternity leave. How do you create a culture that nourishes and supports parents? This is especially important in this pandemic when corporations are not doing a good job employing and serving people who are parents, working parents specifically. And so I really appreciate that Jordana and her partner Alex have thought about this quite a bit. We're going to talk about how she took her maternity leaves and how they impacted the business and how the business supports maternity leaves. So I love this episode. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. If you do, please share it with friends, like us on social media, follow us, sign up for our newsletter, and check out LOLA products. Jordana, thank you so much for joining us on Stork'd today. This is the podcast in which we explore the many ways that people build and define family. And I'm really excited to hear about all the different definitions of family in your life. Can you start by telling us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. And first, I just want to say thank you so much, Julia, for having me. My name is Jordana Kier. I'm one of the co-founders of LOLA, which is a reproductive health brand. The mission of the company is to provide the product's content and access to all products from what we like to say is her first period to her last hot flash and beyond. We're not quite there yet all the way, but that's the vision of the company and the brand. I started the company about 7.5, 8 years ago now. So it's been a journey. I also, and throughout that time have expanded my identity. I now have 2 kids. I have a 3-year-old daughter and an almost 1-year-old son. I'm a wife. I'm a sister. I'm a friend, daughter. I very much love my family, meaning my parents, my sister, my husband, my kids, obviously, my dog, and my team. Right? There's been a lot of development from a just like interpersonal perspective, I would say. And then of course that I think has a lot of impact on how you identify as a person, just the relationships that start to build and grow and contract and expand over time.
Yeah. What I really love about what you're saying in your introduction, there's so much richness there, is this, you called it an interplay between your professional identity and your personal identity. And it sounds like both are evolving, maybe not in lockstep, but they're both on evolution journeys together. Can you tell us a little bit about how your family life has evolved to date? And then we can talk a little bit about how LOLA has evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. I grew up in a very tight-knit family. I'm still very close to both my mom and my dad. I feel very lucky in that respect. I also have a younger sister. She's about 3.5 years younger than me. Also very, very close. And I met my husband, almost 11 years ago. And we got married 7.5 years ago. I'm like trying to do the math.
It's
100 years, 7 years?
7.5 years ago. That was right around when you were starting LOLA?
It was, yeah. We got married in 2014 and the fall of 2014. And then I launched the brand in the summer of 2015. So had already been fundraising and, really starting to get the company off the ground with my partner, Alex, who's like, basically my other spouse. And then Jesse's my husband. We were married for about 4 years. And then we had started to have conversations about having children. And actually, I should say also 2 years into our marriage, we got a dog. And I feel like that was a big change. we love her. She's still a big part of our family, but it was definitely like I think even more so than having children, like the switch where it was like, oh, there's this other thing in my life that I have to be very aware of its needs and sometimes put its needs before mine. And, I have to get up and walk this thing in the morning. We live in New York City, right? It's not like you can kind of open up the door and have it sort of fit very comfortably into the framework of your life. So that was a big change for us. And neither of us actually had grown up with a dog. And so frankly, I don't even know what we were thinking, but we were like, no, let's do it. And she's amazing. Her name's Lucy. We love her. But that was definitely a big shift. And then about 2 years later, had our daughter Rose, New Year's Eve baby. So last baby born in the hospital in 2018. And so, like obviously an enormous change with a baby, but it felt like we had already sort of lost a little bit of like our independence and freedom. And so it was like marginal at that point.
I'm going to interject because I love the conversation of the first family member being a pet. And my mom and I have been talking about this quite a bit. My mom has a tendency to either find really interesting articles or let's call it editorialize things. So I'm going to say something I'm not so sure how real it is, but she claims that there's some research out there that indicates that people who adopt animals, who bring animals into their homes, it sort of primes your brain and gives you this flood of loving hormones that prepares you sometimes biologically and sometimes just emotionally in the heart space to have the next part of your family evolve. I don't know if it's true, but I like the theory.
It's interesting.
Right?
It's very interesting. And I mean, it's funny. I have this distinct memory of Jessie talking to our dog. Obviously, you talk to your animals and saying something about mommy, who was me. And I was like, that's really weird. Like I've never thought of myself as that name, and just feeling a little taken aback and maybe overwhelmed by that. Just because I never like considered myself like a very maternal person. Like I'm not like, I see a baby. I mean, now I'm different. Like now I see a baby and I like just want to eat it. But earlier I just feel like that wasn't my instinct. And so it was always sort of a worry of mine about having kids that it wasn't going to come natural to me. And that's a memory distinctly that I have of Jessie calling me mom, to our dog and being a little overwhelmed by that. But, it didn't stop us. And it certainly, I think having Lucy definitely, I mean, look, having kids, having anything that relies on you to take care of it is kind of irrational, right? Like it's so much time, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of energy. You lose sleep for years. Like in a way, it makes no sense, right? But like it releases, these hormones and it's unconditional love. And it's just, you do it because you want to do it. And you don't even think twice about it. And maybe having Lucy sort of reframed how I thought about, showing up for people I love and that was what being a mom is mostly about.
So I'm curious. So even as you're talking about changing your behavior, changing the way in which you show up for people and allowing your dog to guide you into that behavior change, I'm actually hearing a lot of identity stuff, right? You are simultaneously stepping into the term wife as you are stepping into entrepreneur or CEO, and dog mom, and eventually people mom. And it sounds to me a little bit like the identity shifts were important to you at that time, maybe still. Which of those felt like the easier moniker to wear, and which one was a little bit harder to try on?
Yeah. And also like, I don't know how much I was like expecting to talk about my dog in my evolution here.
You never know what's going to come out. It just happens. Yeah.
It's just so funny. I think, so I've always prided myself on being a very hard worker, being very much like you put in this amount of effort or time and the formula will spit out something that feels like success. And so wearing the hat of entrepreneur and building, that was, of the hats, probably like one of the easier ones. It's still very hard. still have to kind of convince yourself every day that like you're deserving of being the leader of a company, the leader of a brand, et cetera. I think the harder one that I think for me was that I've since I think embraced and come to really love is that of a human mom. But I think specifically the hard part there to me was pregnancy. Mostly because, and I think it sort of played out a little bit against, my professional identity, which was like, it was kind of the first time that I was very aware of my body and the changes that my body was undergoing, and almost feeling like that was separate from my brain, and being very aware of my limitations there, right? Growing a human, it takes so much out of you, and it's incredible, right? But it's also like you're nauseous and you can't eat food, and then all of a sudden you like can't sleep. And I think, for me, working so hard on the business for so many years, and then realizing, I'm going to have to take time off and allow my body to recover and get to know this new human that's a part of my family for the rest of my life, and not sleep and adjust, and adjusting to this new normal. That was I don't know, it was hard, but it was more, I think, just being so aware of all of a sudden being so limited and like having to take care of myself versus, getting up in the morning, like going to the gym early, right? Getting to the office early. Those things just have to shift. And so I think that was a harder hat to put on. And, but then of course, like it just becomes your hat, and it's just the hat that you wear, like I am obsessed with my kids, and I love that hat that I get to wear, but I do want to acknowledge that like it's uncomfortable in the beginning, and it's very much like it is a shift in behavior, and that I think then drives the shift in identity.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And it's so fascinating to me because you are running a company that's designed to support women's bodies or people's bodies. And this heightened awareness of your own body as it was changing. It's fascinating because I think particularly as entrepreneurs and leaders, we often want to separate the head from the body, right? We want to be seen, particularly when we're trailblazing in industries that have previously not had female leadership. You want to be seen for your intelligence, for your drive, for your success, for what you build. And then when you're literally leading with a belly, you walk into a room and the belly shows up first, you're perceived a little bit differently, and your self-perception changes, and you're dealing with things in a different way. So I really appreciate that.
But I have found now, having gone through 2 pregnancies while building this company, and therefore 2 parental leaves, and my partner doing the same, having 2 kids, I think it's really healthy to be able to extract yourself from, like, to me, it was actually a really helpful exercise, and like a healthy exercise to be like, oh, this company can run without you. And like, yeah, you're special, but like, you're not actually that special. And like, it actually, and in the long run, if the mission is, and the vision for this brand is to become a household brand, it better be able to operate without me, And I think that there was a sadness, but there was also a relief in being like, oh, I'm going to take time out and go through this really significant life event. And, my life will forever be changed. But also, like, it's also good for the company to flex and shift and accommodate that, because, it's just kind of life. As life gets more complicated, like, I think it's been really rewarding to look at the company and be like, oh, this company runs, and I'm a part of it, and I show up in the ways that I can and should and want to. But it's also really great that, I can also live my life and pursue these things that I want to do personally, and like, I can step out of it. So I just wanted to call that out. I think it was really great.
So appreciating you calling that out for several reasons. One, just timely that I'm stepping back from my own maternity leave. So it's everything that you're saying is resonating really significantly with me. And 2, you and your partner have been very vocal about creating a culture and an environment that supports maternity leave. So let's talk about leave for a minute. I do want to revisit the decision to start a family and how you did that. But before we do that, let's talk about maternity leave because we're here. And I have several questions for you. The first is, I appreciate your framing that maternity leave can be a great and healthy opportunity for both the business to shine and move on without you, and for you to take stock of what's next. When you re-entered after having done maternity leave, what shifted for you? Were you all systems go back to normal? Did you change your relationship to work? Did you change what your job description looked like? Tell us a little bit about the re-entry process.
Yeah. And I think that, reentry for us as a company is just as important as preparing for leave, right? I think a lot of companies, and this is a generalization, but I feel like as a country and more generally, we talk about leave in this concrete time period of whatever it is, 6 to 12 weeks, ideally more, let's call it 12 weeks. That's what we offer. But in reality, it's like for the rest of your life and very significant time and impactful, I would say, in the first 1 to 5 years of your child's life. And so I think for us, it's also the re-onboarding of somebody is equally as important as making sure the business is set up in the right way while that person is out. And so the way we approach that is really making sure that those first few weeks back, you're not doing full weeks, you're not doing full days. I'll back up. On the way out, we try to do more of a shadow process. So, you set up your plan a few weeks before your due date. You're starting to shadow the people who are going to be taking over your day-to-day responsibilities. And the same goes then when you re-enter. So you start to become the shadow again first. You're observing, you're taking stock of what's happened, getting caught up to speed. And then the switch happens probably 2 to 3 weeks after that, where then you're kind of back in the driver's seat. And so, really kind of making the on-ramp just as comfortable and supported and planned out as the off-ramp, I think is really key. And then of course, it's different, right? Like I do remember with my daughter, I kept nursing her at 6 p.m. Like it was kind of her evening feed. After I had come back to work, and I was also pumping. And so that's time during the day. That's, I had to be at home at 6 in order to feed her. And similarly with my son too. And that's a change, right? But I think it's also like a good one because it just forces you to ensure that your attention throughout the day is allocated and focused on the right things. And because at 5:30 or at 5:45, you have to be out. Like, you know what I mean? You have to shut the computer and maybe you log on later and, catch up on a few things, but for a solid chunk of, let's call it 6 to 8, you're not available. And I think that just drives a desire then to be even more efficient with your day and to say, hey, do I actually have to be in this meeting? Or, hey, can we reschedule this? I have a doctor's appointment for my, the 6-month checkup. And just being honest and open and calling things out. And I hope that, with more women in leadership positions who have young children who, need to carve out that time, like are taking that time for themselves or carving that time out, because I think it just sets a really good example. Twice a day, I had to be in the lactation room pumping. Yeah. I mean, now it's interesting because now I feel like calling in, like dialing into a meeting isn't, as weird as it probably was back in 2019. So it's, I think in that way, like, this environment supports, well, in many ways, it does not support working parents, but in that specific example, I think it's been helpful. But everything shifts, right? And I think it's also, it just forces you to be really economical with your time.
And did your priorities at work shift? Did you find that the things that you wanted to focus on in the number of hours that you're focusing on the business during the work day or even at night or weekends or however you structured your time, did you find that evolved where you wanted to pay attention or what you wanted to do in your career changed?
I'll say this. Every time either Alex or I went out on leave, it was an opportunity for us to obviously step in and oversee areas of the business that we hadn't been overseeing historically, and then say, hey, this could be done in an interesting way over here. Or, maybe we should combine these two functions. And so we found opportunities to ensure that the org was evolving in the way that the business, in what the business needed. And so then when one of us came back, I wouldn't say it was like a drastically new company with a new operating structure, but there had been an evolution. And I would say like the areas of oversight over time have shifted for the two of us. Like in the beginning of the business, I oversaw what Alex oversees now, and she oversaw what I oversee now. And so, or, vice versa. And so, yeah, and those moments of when one of us was out drove those changes over time. So I don't know if it was like things that we were doing on a day-to-day basis, like the tactical things really shifted. It was a little more like, what is the structure of the company today? Where are we going tomorrow? How do we ensure that it's set up in the way that optimizes for our outcomes? And I think it's also helpful that I do think Alex and I are like, don't have a ton of ego in that way of being like, no, wait, I have to oversee this. Like we've always been very much like, this is business first. Let's show up how we can to support the business.
Well, so you've mentioned Alex a number of times, and I know that you both went on maternity leaves. Was it 3 in a very short period of time, or 4?
It was, let me see. She had her first in late 2017. I had Rosie. Basically, I was out first part of 2019. Alex was out middle of 2019, and then I was out last year. So yeah, I mean, in 4 years, we had 4 kids.
Yeah, so that has a significant impact on a business. And also your business is serving a customer that's often female. And I would imagine, I'm going to extrapolate here, because you've got women in the leadership team, I'm assuming that quite a number of your employees are female. So I'm expecting or assuming that you guys may be somewhat more supportive of maternity leaves and women in the workplace than some of your competitors, or certainly other firms out there. How do you give advice to somebody who might not have that same basis of support or that same cultural norming that you and Alex have created to both gently exit and gently reenter following the birth of a child?
I mean, it's like the question.
Yeah. Can you just solve all of corporate America's problems around employing women right now on this podcast for us, please? That would be great.
I mean, I do think that we're not there yet, right? Like the idea that we are not a country that has paid parental leave makes my heart hurt. Aside from the fact that it's the wrong thing to do morally, it also economically isn't a good decision. Like that's where I'm like, I don't really understand where you're going with this here. Like this could actually keep more people in the workforce, improve our GDP. There's just a lot of rational reasons to do it, aside from also being humans. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I do think we've made progress, right? Like I think, as I said before, I think the more women you have in leadership positions, the more like we've had. You mentioned that most of our staff are women or identify as women. That is true. We do have men on the team who take leave, right? I think it's not just incumbent upon women or the child bearers to take the time off. It's also incumbent upon the partners to be present and lead by example too. So I think we've made progress. And I would say in this moment in time too, like it's a great time to be an employee. Like I think employers are very aware of wanting to keep their talent and keep people motivated and engaged. And I think part of the way they do that is through strong benefits packages. So that's another thing that I think we have going for us to make more structural change here.
Do you think you're more aware of the benefits packages and the supporting all employees because you're female-led, or even because of the industry in which you're focused?
I think probably. I mean, I'd like to think that like any company that I was running, I would be thinking about these things. But yeah, I think you're probably right that in some way, I mean, talking about reproductive health and talking about how to support people going through these journeys from a business perspective, certainly we have to walk the walk too.
Yeah.
So it's also about showing up for our team.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate this because having run a very small business, our teams, and particularly those people that we work most closely with, our co-founders or partners or peers, are family in so many ways. And so thinking about how you support and nurture and provide for them as they grow and develop their own families is a really key component of having a thriving company. Unfortunately, it's one that we're finding in this pandemic. So few people can stay employed because of the childcare crisis. So let's go back to some of the origin stories. There's two that I'm really curious about. Well, if you take LOLA as one of your babies, one of those things that you've created and nurtured and grown and developed, tell us a little bit about how LOLA came to be.
Yeah. So Lola was born. I was coming out of business school. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. My background is in nonprofit, but I knew I wanted to, try my hand at the private sector, the for-profit sector, but I wasn't like feeling particularly inspired by the big companies that were coming to recruit on campus. And Jesse at the time was starting up his own PR brand communications firm and working with a lot of companies, brands in and around New York City, and just seeing kind of this was around 2012, the slow growth of, new brands coming to market, targeting a very specific consumer pain point. And so I was lamenting to him one night over dinner, talking about like, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life and what was going to happen. And he said, start your own company. And I was like, that's a crazy idea. I don't know anything about that. And he was like, no, like what's a pain point that you have with products that you need? And tampons was the first thing that came to my mind. More so though, first from the perspective of like, it never seemed like I had a tampon when I needed one. And that was right around the time too, when there was like all of these direct to consumer subscription companies. And I was like, oh my God, like this is the subscription I can't cancel. Like, why doesn't this exist anymore? And like, I could build this really beautiful brand that helps to rid this category of stigma. Like, why shouldn't these products be beautiful? Why am I always shoving a tampon up my sleeve when I'm on my way to the bathroom? And, why is the packaging so ugly? And so there were just like so many just like low bars in the space that as a user of the product, I just felt like, okay, yes, I don't have any background in CPG, but I am a domain expert in my own right here. And so let me start to, craft what I think is the brand, the tone, the look and feel, something that I would want to buy every single month.
I'm just going to highlight what you just said, because I think it's so important. You just said, I'm a domain expert, which is what you're saying is I know my body and I know what my body needs. And that's sufficient for me to be an expert. And the reason I want to pause there is because I think so often, particularly when we're talking about women's bodies, we like to defer to other experts. We like to defer to doctors or researchers or scientists. So you just said, and I think it's important, I am the domain expert. I am the expert in my own body. And your products give consumers the ability to be the expert in their bodies and to choose something that feels right to them, a nice brand or the right resource or the right whatever. So I think that's really just so important. And I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, I really believe it. And I think, the sort of second like iteration of the brand was also about ingredients, because as I was starting to build the brand positioning, build the, what did the product look like? And I was like, okay, well, where am I going to source the product? And realizing that I had never even thought to myself, like what this product was made out of. I think to your point, right? It's like, listening to these other people being like, trust us, here's this answer, here's that answer. And just for the first time with this area of my life, realizing that I had never done the research myself, even though, I was always thinking about the food that I was putting in my body and getting enough exercise, drinking enough water. Like every other aspect of making sure that I was supporting my body, I was doing, with the exception of this area. And it was because, we don't talk about it as a society. We don't share learnings and stories from like a multi-generational perspective. And there was just no dialogue. And therefore, there was no reason for anything to change from an industry perspective, from a regulatory perspective, like nothing. And so that was also when I was like, okay, I don't know the answers to this. But like, I'm going to go find out. And I'm angry that I've never thought about this before. And also when I look it up or I call the big brands, or I look on the back of a box, it says this product may contain, I'm thinking to myself, well, this is not acceptable in any other part of my life. Why would this be acceptable here? And so that was really, I think, when it really hit deep. Because yes, you can build a nice brand, you can build something direct to consumer, you can build something that's subscription, but to make it stick, like it had to be something that, really resonated. And so right around then I met Alex, and I remember we met over a beer, and I was like, hi, I'm Jordana. Like, have you ever thought about what's in your tampon? This is like a crazy thing to ask somebody who you don't know, but we totally hit it off. And she too was like, I can't now unthink this. Like, I have never thought about this, but now can't stop thinking about it. And so that's the origin story. And it's been amazing too. And incredibly special to get to do that while going through my own reproductive journey.
I was really excited when I revisited your brand. In my head, it was always period products, and recently had the opportunity to revisit all that you offer. And it's so much more. It really does support the whole human trajectory for people who have uteruses. So I think that's really interesting. I'm going to use a charged word as I transition here, and I'm curious how you react to it. You make it seem easy. You make it seem easy to step into entrepreneurialism. You make it seem easy to start a business, to start a family. How does that resonate for you? Did it feel easy at the time?
So I think you have to be a little naive and crazy to do any of it, right? To launch a business, to have kids, to get married, like all of it is like, you don't really know what you're getting yourself into. Mm-hmm. And so I have been very fortunate that, I don't know if it's like all come easy to me, but that I've worked hard and I have been able to unlock at least that first phase. But then that's where it gets hard. Day two, right? It's like, building, recruiting a team, managing through a freaking pandemic, right? Retaining our team, dealing with competitive dynamics with a lot of these big guys who have now come after us on the shelf. That's the hard stuff. And it's been very difficult, but it's also what I think both I want and I have committed myself to, right? Like, I remember this is a weird, probably, connection, but like, I remember when we got Lucy, our dog, and I remember like the first few weeks, we were like, this is the right thing. Should we just like give her back? And like, you can't, I don't know. I mean, we could have, but like, you can't, right? And so like, in some ways there's just, you make commitments, right? Like, you make commitments to your team, you make commitments to your kids, you make commitments to your family. And sometimes it's really freaking hard. And other times it feels easy. And like, when it works, it works. When it doesn't, it's a house of cards and it's a mess. And I think it's also like not acknowledging that it's all a roller coaster and that it's highs and it's lows. And like learning to be comfortable in uncertainty, which is basically like every job posting.
Yeah.
I always think about now with like a lot of, sad laughter, because you're like, oh, can you like thrive in ambiguity? And like, of course, now it's just like, that's our world and we deal with uncertainty every day. And,
it takes on a new meaning.
Right. Yeah. Like, who knows when our kids are going to be vaccinated and like, we can, go out to dinner, but it's like learning to be more comfortable in moments that don't have a natural resolution. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's all hard.
Yeah. And I realized the question was framed a little bit inappropriately, because life doesn't have to be hard, right? It doesn't have to be It's not like we need to have the challenge porn. Tell me about the challenge and how you overcame it, which is a typical interview question, in addition to how do you survive or thrive in ambiguity. But it is interesting to hear about what's happening behind the surface, what's happening behind the beautiful brand and the excellent logo and the wonderful communication style to consumers. And what I'm hearing is happening is somebody who herself has gone through a big journey to become a mom, to become a parent, to become the leader that you are now, while guiding a family through growth and a business through growth. And that's really cool. I want to go back just to the very beginning. We talked about your dog, but in so talking about your dog, you mentioned that the term mom wasn't the most comfortable for you. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into motherhood? How did you get comfortable with this new persona?
I think just adjusting to like the new normal, right? And like whether that's like I launch a business and now I'm a CEO and like, wait, that's weird. But over time, just having that become the new normal, like I think it's similar with becoming a parent. And I mean, my husband Jesse said something to me, maybe it was before we had kids, but he said something like, because I was like, I don't know, are we ready? Am I ready? And he was like, I don't know if we're ever going to be ready. And like, until you actually just, kind of go for it. And so, over time, I just think it's just become the new normal, right? And seeing them become humans and, like my daughter is 3, she has a lot of opinions. She internalizes like, and the things that Jesse and I are saying to each other or talking about and asking us about it. And so it's overwhelming sometimes to be like, oh my God, I'm like, I'm already screwing her up. Like the things that I'm, that I'm talking about or, whatever, but that's amazing. It's like the greatest part. And it's wonderful, seeing them start to grow up and become their own people.
Was it a difficult decision for you at the time that you chose to become a parent? And you said that Jesse had made the comment, you might never be ready. You were also growing Lola. I mean, it was evolving. It was your first baby in some ways. Was it a hard choice to say, now I'm also going to take a moment and build my family?
It was. I mean, but again, it was like gradual. And I also, I'm very grateful that I had in a business partner, somebody who had just gone through something like that. And so, she set a good example for me and for the business, right? Leaving early to get home for bedtime because that was important time for her to spend with her kid. I similarly do the same thing, right? Like 6 to 7 is really important family time to sort of have with my kids. And it's our family value is like time, like spending time, because that is sort of like what you can't get back. And I realize it's a privilege to be able to sign off early, right? But I also think, especially in this weird world now where where it's hard sometimes to understand like when work ends, where personal time begins and all of that, like it's even more important then to set the boundaries that you need. And so these are my boundaries, right? And over time, I've adjusted to the fact that nobody's going to give that to me. I have to take it.
That's interesting. That's really interesting because what you just said, that Alex set the tone, that you almost trailblazed for you. I would assume, maybe incorrectly, that you then have this culture, this normalized focus on family, that it then seems not like it's given to you, but it's there, it's available to you. And what you're saying is, no, even though we had this role model in Alex who went first and we built a culture that normalized this, I still have to take it. I still have to prioritize it.
Totally. And I also think sometimes it's also not always my instinct. I don't always do that. I don't always take that time for myself. To call that out specifically, like, because you were talking about taking the time to be with your family. But I also think it's like, let's talk about taking the time for you to have your time and make sure that the identity that you had pre-kids, if you want, is something that you can continue to cultivate and nurture. Like, I think of the action of making sure that you are whole first and foremost, because I mean, look, it's the same thing. I I like to come to work. I like to leave my house. Also because I derive a lot of pleasure and satisfaction from my work, but I also know that having time away from my kids, that means that the time I get to spend with them, like I can be the best parent that I want to be and that I want my kids to have. And so taking care of yourself then also means taking care of your kids.
That's great. So let's wrap up with a couple of fun little questions. The first is, when you think about this period of time, this building period, creating Lola, creating your family, developing yourself into who you are now, is there a playlist or a song or something that comes to mind that encapsulates where you are right now? Question is really, does your family building journey have a theme song?
Well, I don't know if we have a theme song, but I was thinking about, so my daughter really loves the Beatles, as do I. And she didn't watch the documentary because she can't watch 7 hours of TV. But I really loved the whole, watching that whole creative process, having them conceive of the Let It Be album. So we've been listening a lot to that album, and the song that she loves on that album is Two of Us. So we listen to that song a lot. But it actually, I think there's something so joyful about that song, and like it just reminds me to be very present with her, like that we're, two pals skipping down a road and can take on anything.
How do you define family? If you're going to give me like a word, a sentence, what does family mean to you?
Family means to me, I think, two things. One is empathy and one is respect. Because like when I'm at home with my kids, like I want to feel like I'm giving them my attention, right? And I'm putting myself in their shoes as just as much as I want them to put themselves in other people's shoes. I just feel like that's the way to build like humility and always seeking for new perspectives. So those are my two words.
I love those words. Those are really good ones. Thank you. All right, last question. You are doing so much in your family building, but in Lola, you're also doing a lot to transform the whole world of women's wellness. Do you have a vision for where Lola is headed next?
I want it to become a household brand, and I hope it does. And I feel like we're on our way. We want to be there for anybody going through a reproductive health journey.
It's important to have businesses and people like you focused on the whole self, which includes who we are as family builders, to think about our bodies and have sovereignty in our bodies and all those elements. So I appreciate that you built a brand that serves that. If somebody is not familiar with your brand and wants to learn more about how to get your products, what you offer, maybe even where to find you, can you give us a little guidance there?
Sure. They can go to our website, www.mylola.com, or find us on Instagram at Lola, LOLA.
Awesome. I encourage you to check it out. There's a robust suite of offerings and really awesome. It's such a pleasure to talk with you, Jordana. Thank you so much today.
Likewise. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.
Hello, Stork'd family. Did you know that the FDA does not require tampon brands to provide a full list of ingredients on their boxes? Yeah, seriously. That's why so many of the big names use the disclaimer, may contain, before they list all these synthetic ingredients like rayon, polyester, and fragrance. It's time you meet Lola. They're always up front, even on the back of the box. Founded by women with sky-high standards who think that what they put on and in our bodies matters. Lola offers period, sexual wellness, and vaginal health essentials made with high-quality, natural ingredients. Gynecologist-approved, clean products that are by your side during every stage of your life. Find exactly what you need at mylola.com, Amazon, Walmart, and select retailers nationwide.